What's up, WordPress nerds? In this video, I'm going to be going over 3 different ways you can use Ajax in WordPress. We're going to be talking about the pros and cons of each, and then ultimately benchmarking them against each other using Artillery.js. If you are new to the channel, make sure to ring the bell and hit the subscribe button to make sure you get notified of my weekly WordPress videos. All right, let's jump into it. All right, so this is the example project we're going to be working with. We have 3 different examples that I want to go through. The first one is Admin-Ajax.php, the second is the Rewrite API, and the third one is the REST API. I'm just using things that are default in WordPress, so we're not installing any extra plugins or anything like that, so you can try this out on your own project if you want. And then I also have all of the code included in the description on my GitHub, so if you want to download this theme, install it, and kind of mess with what I've got right here, you can as well. So we're going to be talking about the pros and cons of each, and then finally going and using Artillery.js to send a bunch of requests at these and see how well they perform. So let's start with Admin-Ajax. So in this project, we have an index.php, which has a form in it. So this has an ID of contact form. And this contact form has a couple different form fields. It has a name, an email address, the select, which the name should equal gender, and then the input type of hidden that has a name of action and a value of send contact form. And since we're taking a look at admin-ajax.php, this is where we want to focus. In WordPress, when you want to send an Ajax request through admin-ajax.php, what you would do is you would add an action to wp_ajax_blank. And so in that blank is what the action name would be. So in this case, it would be send contact form. And so once you are saying, hey, I want to reserve wp_ajax_send contact form. And then when it is triggered, it will run a function. And so what that will look like is if we're saying, localhost /wp-admin/admin-ajax.php and !action equals send contact form. And so that's what's going to trigger this action right here. So what we're doing is inside of our JavaScript is we're saying, hey, when the contact form is submitted, we want to do a request to wp-admin admin-ajax.php, and we want to send off a body of data. And so what that body of data is, it's a form that has been that's gone through the form data class in JavaScript. That's default. And then it has also been passed through the URL search params class, which will take all of that data and put it into that query string that we were just looking at. So it'll look a little something like this. It's not escaped like I've got it right here, but it's going to send it to that URL. And then there's also going to be additional data, and it's going to be name equals Alex and email equals, whatever at whatever.com. And so that's what's going to be sent to WordPress. And so when it gets it, it's going to run this function, process contact form. And so it's going to take the request and it's going to combine it with a response from the Star Wars API. The reason why I'm doing that is just to slow down the request a little bit, and so we can kind of get some bigger numbers just to take a look at. And that is going to be the same for each one of these methods. So let's take a test drive of it really quick. Let's refresh this page and let Flywheel kind of spin back up. So my name is Alex. My email is alex@wpcasts.tv. I am male. So let's hit submit. So we get a JSON response, and that JSON response is an array, or has an array that has our Death Star in it, and it also has our contact form submission. So you can see all of the data that came through that submission. And so what is the pro of doing it this way? Well, first of all, as we just saw, it's really easy to do, especially when you're dealing with form stuff. You can just have action equals the name of the thing that you want to run, and then it just runs a function when that happens, and you just take the data, do whatever you want with it. So you take that contact form information, you send it to the database, and you're good to go. The other downside to that, or I guess the downside to this, is that Admin-Ajax can be very slow. And it can be slow under certain circumstances. And let me explain that. So when using Admin-Ajax.php, it is building out that query string that we saw. It's got this question mark action equals send contact form. And so that's what the entire URL becomes. Now with proxies and certain like caching plugins, mini caching, they're not going to cache it at all, because that is a URL that has a bunch of query strings in it, and that's not something that they cache. So if you are retrieving something from the database, like relevant posts or related posts or something like that, every time that request is being made, it's being made uncached. And so if you're doing other things, like you hit a button and it's retrieving all the posts on your site, and then you're doing stuff with it on the other end, that's going to always be running uncached. And so if you have tens of thousands of posts on your WordPress site, that could potentially crash your entire server. And so the reasons why you would want to avoid that is for that exact reason. However, if you're sending something like a contact form or doing small requests, it's honestly not that big of a deal. But if you are worried about performance, there are other methods that you can do. So for example, we also have the REST API. And so the REST API is a little bit more complicated to get set up. However, it is a very robust way of dealing with Ajax requests. So in the rest-ajax.js that I have here, all it's doing is it's sending a request to a REST route that I've set up called stores, and it's grabbing the 6th store, and then it's just sending that JSON response back, or console logging the JSON response. And so the JSON API is extending the REST controller, and it is a class that we can just create a bunch of methods on. And so when we are on the REST API init, we're checking to see if it exists. If it doesn't exist, we're creating a new instance of this class, and we're running register routes. And so register routes is giving us our a couple options. The first one is to pass in a prefix for our route, and then it's giving us the rest of the route to play with. So we're going to say /stores, and then a regular expression kind of saying what we're looking for in this route. And in this route, in between these two angle brackets, is the store ID. And that's just something that we've created, something arbitrary that we decide that we want to pull in. And so we're saying that when the method is readable, meaning that this is like a GET request, we want to get this store, not posting or creating a store, that we want to run a callback in the context of this class called get store rest. And so that's going to get passed in the request. And we're going to grab the store ID, which we set inside of the REST route registration. And then we're going to get that post based off that store ID. We're going to grab another starship, and we're going to send back that response in an array with the store and the API response body. So the starship response. Set the status to 200 and then return that response. And so, yeah, it's a little bit more complicated to get set up, but when you start to dig into the REST API, it's a lot of fun. It gives you a lot of different things to work with, and you can make some really robust applications with it. All right, so let's test this out real quick. So we just click the button. Don't pay attention to how long it's taking. My local development server needs to warm back up. It goes to sleep after I don't touch it for a minute. So then we get a JSON response and we get a star destroyer back along with the store that we asked for called Alex's REST store. So that is awesome. It also works just the exact same way as Admin-Ajax would work. Some of the pros and cons this way. So the pros is that you are working with inside of the REST API and it actually gives you a URL. And so why is that important? So if we take a look here at our network tab, we are actually given a URL down here at the bottom. It says Admin-Ajax or Ajax complete guide.local/wp-json, WPC, v1, stores 6. That is something that is actually cacheable. So that is something that, those proxies or caching plugins can grab and say, you know what, when we visit this URL, we get a very specific set of data. Let's hold on to that. And that's exactly what they do. So if you were to actually visit that URL directly, you get this nice set of data. And that's something that will, take initially a little bit longer to grab, but then subsequent requests will be faster. And so that is a huge thumbs up for using the JSON API to grab stuff. However, I would say that the downside to it is that it's a slippery slope using the REST API. And what I mean by that is that it starts out fast, but could potentially get slower over time. Why would it get slower over time? Many plugins hook into the REST API, and there's lots of different plugins and themes that hook into it and eventually slow it down. And so every time that you are hitting this URL, it is running the entirety of WordPress, and it is also asking all the other different plugins and stuff, hey, do you also need to hook into the REST API? And then so there's a lot of potential there, and that's why I say slippery slope. There's a slippery slope between having a fast REST API experience and a slow REST API experience, depending on the rest of your project. So again, that could be an edge case for some, or it could be a very harsh reality for others. So just keep that in mind when you're deciding which method that you want to do. Personally, the REST API is my favorite if you are very aware of all the other plugins and what's also going and hooking into your REST API. The last one that I want to talk about is the rewrite API. And I did a video on this, which I'll link up at the top right now. This one was kind of interesting. So this one, if I open up, I think it's 10up. So 10up has this best practices page here. And if you look up Ajax, their Ajax endpoints portion suggests that you use the rewrite API. And so I got really curious about it. I did a lot of research on it and I thought, oh, that's actually pretty cool. And that's when I made the video. And it kind of stands up after kind of doing some of this experimentation. So the way that you do it is that you go over to, let's open up that file. So the rewrite API is also pretty simple. It's along the same lines as far as simplicity goes with getting up and running anyway, as using Admin-Ajax.php. But essentially you just create an action on a init and you add some endpoints. So you set up some variables in a rewrite tag with a regular expression and use that same regular expression when you're adding a rewrite rule. So you create your URL, just kind of like we did with the REST API. And you're saying where you want it to go when it catches it. So we're saying just go to index.php and set the store ID to what it found in the regular expression. And then that sets up that URL. And then so when you change pages in WordPress, in this case, we hook into template redirect, we can check to see if that's our URL and if that variable is set inside of it. So we grab the WP query that's set and we're checking for the store ID. And if it's set, then let's get that post, get another starship, and then send the JSON request or this JSON success back. And so if you're want to avoid regular expressions and all that kind of stuff altogether, that's fine. You can just use the REST API. If it doesn't bother you, then this is another way to do it. And I like this method because it's pretty much guaranteed that it's going to be relatively untouched by other plugins and stuff like that. When we look at the action reference in WordPress, and we were to look at the order of all of these different actions, from top to bottom, it's ordering in this order. And so you have a init here, which is what you probably used a lot. But then once WordPress is set up, you then have template redirect. So this is something that happens very early in the WordPress process. So that is something that is a huge plus. Number one is that it's starting at the very top. Number two, it's a relatively like untouched area of WordPress. So you don't have to worry about, other plugins hooking into it as much, right? So that is, big within air quotes on all of this, is that this could be different on your sites depending on what else is running out there. So if you're finding that you have problems with your REST API or with Admin-Ajax.php, this is another option for you. And so those are kind of the three options. Let's take a look at how this works. It kind of gives us the same thing as the REST API. It also gives you a straight up URL. So /API/source/5. Very simple. Caching plugins pick it up. It takes a little bit longer the first time, but then should be faster from then on out because it's cached. So let's take a look at the front end here, and let's just refresh it. And then we can take a look at the rewrite API example. So we can just click get the store from the API. It comes back with the success. We get our Starship, and then we get our store back. So far so good. So let's take a look finally at, well, hopefully that kind of answers some questions on how these work and why you might use one versus the other. Admin-Ajax doesn't work well with caching plugins or anything like that. So use it if you're doing small queries or you're submitting data like, a contact form or whatever. It's no big deal. The REST API is great because it's cacheable. It's easy to work with, very robust. However, it can be slow if other plugins are using it. The rewrite API has, a little bit more of a difficult syntax, I would say, just simply because it has regular expressions as part of it. I guess it's the same with the REST API, but it's kind of happens at a very early stage in WordPress, and it can be safely regarded as mostly untouched by other plugins. So hopefully that just gives you a little bit more information. I'm not necessarily saying you have to use one always, but the more information, the more you know, the better, kind of a thing. So the last thing let's take a look at is we can use artillery.io. It's you have to have Node installed and npm installed, and what we're going to do is we're going to kind of send a bunch of requests to those three different URLs and see kind of what response times we get back. So I ran npm install-g artillery, and so when I open up artillery, or I can clear this out because I ran my test earlier. We can run artillery-v, and we can see what version I'm on. I'm on 1.6. So let's take a look at the different URLs that we can test out. So I'm going to just open up my notes here. And we have three different URLs that we're going to be testing out here. We have our admin-ajax.php. I'm not sending over all of the form information because it's not going to make any difference, and it makes it for a smaller URL we can look at. The rewrite API, and then the REST API. And so over here in the documentation, you can just run a quick test on a URL. So that's all we're going to do. So we're going to say, run this test, but instead of hitting their website, we are going to run the contact form one. So this is admin-ajax.php. And so it's going to run and hit it a bunch of times, and we're going to come back with a nice little report as to how it did. And we'll write down the numbers next to it. So the minimum, maximum, and median request latency is what we're going to take a look at. So this one was a minimum of 265 milliseconds, maximum 8,562. And so the median was 491. We get slightly different numbers on the next run through. So we'll just take those 217, 99, 29, and 530. So let's clear that out and let's see what the other ones do. So next up, instead of Admin-Ajax, let's just use the rewrite API, and let's see how well that compares to Admin-Ajax. All right, so we're starting that up, and we'll see how that goes. All right, so that one had a minimum of 0.9 milliseconds, maximum of 9412, and a median of 1.3. So we can kind of see already that the rewrite API is faster than Admin-Ajax. So let's just keep that right there. Did we? Yeah, we didn't copy request latency. Let's just do that just because. And then let's take a look at the REST API. So if we delete the URL for the rewrite API, let's take a look at the REST API, see how it does. All right, so we got a minimum of 10 milliseconds, maximum of 11,000, and a median of 26. So if we were to kind of take a look at all of these all together, it looks like to me, I'm no expert, but it looks like the rewrite API has the best numbers, and then the REST API kind of after that, and then finally the Admin-Ajax. So this is, of course, just in kind of a blank theme. These numbers will shift depending on what else you have on your project, but I thought it was a kind of a cool little fun little thing to experiment with. So I hope you guys learned something. I definitely did as I was making this video. I was surprised by some of the results, to be honest. So if you learned something, give the video a thumbs up. And remember, if you're new here, subscribe to the channel, ring the bell. I do this weekly. So if you're interested in learning more about WordPress, I am here to help you out. Also just launched a Patreon. There is a link in the description if you want to support me. Buy me a coffee because I'm doing this after all the kids go to bed and I am needing caffeine. So the more coffee, the better. But anyway, I appreciate you guys supporting the channel and I will see you in the next one.